911, what is location of your emergency?
Everett, Washington.
In September 2017, a babysitter contacted Washington Emergency Services to report an armed attack at a home.
I see a shot in the wall next to the door.
The information was enough to launch an operation, and officers immediately found a deceased woman. Things started to get pretty weird when the police began their investigation. They realized that this woman didn't have any enemies. They soon realized that the attack wasn't aimed at her, but at someone very close to her. If you want to know everything that happened, stay with me until the end of the video. Hello everyone, how are you? My name is Lesma. I hope you are doing very well. As always, I'm very happy to be here with you for another day and very grateful that you are watching me wherever you are. Today we have a case that happened in the United States, that of Alicia Canales. Join me to see all the details. Alicia Canales Maguire was born on October 29, 1992 in Washington, USA, the youngest of 5 daughters born to Manuel and Michelle Canales. They raised their 5 daughters on a small farm, and from a very young age they learned the value of hard work and on top of that, family unity, which is why they all got along so well. But in this case, we're going to focus on the oldest sister, a girl named Amanda. Remember her name because it's going to be very important later in the story. Returning to Alicia, those who knew her described her as a warm, kind woman with a big smile. And they also say she had a very important calling. She connected easily with others. So because of this, she found work as a nursing assistant at a care facility, where she was highly appreciated by everyone in her care. She also loved being outdoors, camping, swimming, and hiking. Once she grew up and finished her studies, Alicia moved from her parents' farm to a small nearby town. Her sister Amanda and some of her other sisters did the same to move on with their lives. But despite this, Alicia always returned to the family property to help her parents with the farm chores. At the end of the day, she was a very happy young woman and very close to her family. And on top of that, she also had time to make her own life. When she was a bit older, she started dating a guy named Bradley Maguire, and in 2017 they got married in a beautiful ceremony. She wanted to be a mother, and at that point, her life seemed to be heading in the best possible direction. But her sister Amanda wasn't going through the best of times romantically, and that made Alicia a bit sad. Her sister was divorcing her partner, who was the father of her children, and the divorce hadn't been good at all. In fact, they had had too many problems. Let's also remember this man's name, which will be just as important in the story. Alicia's brother-in-law is named Kevin Lewis. Keeping all this context in mind and knowing how the family dynamic worked at the time, we can move to September 2017, 2 months after Alicia's wedding. On the 20th specifically, her sister Amanda had to go on a business trip to New York and asked Alicia if she could stay at her house to watch her kids. Alicia had an excellent relationship with her nieces and nephews. She spent a lot of time with them and loved taking care of them. On top of that, Amanda was also going to leave a babysitter at the house. It wasn't like Alicia had to handle everything, so in the end, she agreed. That night passed very quietly until the early morning hours, when a call to 911 started an investigation that would leave everyone shocked.
911, what is location of your emergency?
Everett, Washington.
And just before 2 in the morning, emergency operators started receiving several calls from people in the neighborhood.
I don't know what happened, but there were actually gunshots.
Among them, one from a woman who first identified herself as a babysitter. This babysitter said she was at the house of the children she watched, and that while she was sleeping, she was woken up by what sounded like gunshots. She said she ran downstairs and found a terrifying scene at the front door. According to her, she saw a bullet hole in the wall right next to the door.
I see a shot in the wall next to the door.
and in a nervous voice she simply said there was a woman lying on the floor, seriously injured.
She is lying in her own blood.
To put things in context and understand what the scene was like at that moment, we have to keep in mind that the injured person was inside the house. So, when emergency services arrived, they first had a hard time opening the front door. Mind you, they did see the bullet holes and several bloodstains on the door at first. But the person's body was blocking the entrance, so it took them a few minutes to open the door. And when they got in, they did indeed identify a young woman lying on the floor. In addition, in the living room, specifically on the couch, a 3-year-old boy was sitting uninjured. Immediately, when the babysitter heard the police had arrived, she came downstairs with the other children and said that the woman who had been attacked and was deceased at that moment was Alicia, the aunt of the kids she was watching. In addition, there was a vehicle parked in front of the house. On top of this, several bullets were found embedded in its door, and some shell casings were found at the scene. Otherwise, the house was in order and there were no signs of forced entry, so a robbery gone wrong was quickly ruled out. In fact, everything pointed to a very well-planned execution. Meanwhile, miles away, Amanda's phone wouldn't stop ringing. She didn't actually answer because by the time they called, it was already morning and she was busy with work. Finally, her father also started calling her very insistently, which Amanda found strange, and at that moment he told her there had been an attack at her house. On the other end of the line, her father was practically inconsolable, and as best he could, told her what had happened, that her sister was gone, but he also gave her the news that her children were fine. Amanda started feeling very guilty at that moment. She didn't really understand what had happened, but the only thing she knew was that she had asked Alicia to stay at her house those days. So, what she did was take the first flight back home, because first of all, she didn't just want to know what had happened to her sister, but she also wanted to be with her children who needed her then more than ever. Now, beyond the family's grief and the initial shock, authorities had to answer one question. Who had taken Alicia's life? Why had they decided to go to the house and execute her? Investigators started looking for suspects and began with the most obvious option in these cases, Alicia's husband, Brad. However, he was quickly ruled out because he had a solid alibi, and no one had anything negative to say about him or their relationship. In fact, they were described as the near-perfect couple. So, with no clear suspects, the investigation seemed to stall during the first few hours. And what the authorities did was try to reconstruct Alicia's last day alive. But this didn't bring up any relevant clues. The babysitter confirmed they weren't expecting visitors, and neighbors said they hadn't seen any strange people around that day or in the preceding days. Mind you, even though most neighbors said they hadn't seen anything, one person did give a brief statement that started to guide the investigation. A neighbor said he had heard the gunshots, and unlike the other neighbors who had hidden in their homes, he had gone out to see what was happening. He mentioned seeing a figure dressed entirely in black. He couldn't see the face, but because of the build, he assumed it was a man and that he was about 6 feet tall. In addition, he also said there was a car waiting for him very close to the house. So with this, the authorities were able to determine that it had indeed been a direct, planned attack, and had nothing to do with a random event or a robbery gone wrong, as I told you earlier. But here, they could start thinking that maybe Alicia had an enemy no one knew about. And it was at this point in the investigation, when they didn't know which way to turn, that one of the officers brought up an idea that changed everything. Maybe they were wrong, and not only were they looking for the motives, but maybe they were also looking for the motives of the wrong person. And they started to realize this when the officers who responded to the emergency calls said it wasn't the first time they had been to that house. As they explained, 3 months earlier they had responded to 2 domestic violence calls at the same address. But on both occasions, the person asking for help was Amanda, Alicia's sister. As I told you, at that time she was going through a very conflict-ridden divorce, and according to reports, her ex-partner's behavior was alarming. In the first incident, it was known that Kevin had called Alicia to get her to go back to him, but she refused. When the woman told him she didn't want to see him again, he went to the house and started acting very violently. He even threatened her. He told her that for him to grant the divorce, he wanted custody of their 3 children. But not because he wanted to spend time with them, but because he wanted to force her to pay full child support. In the second incident, the violence escalated. Kevin threatened to take Amanda's life, and according to the officers who responded to this emergency, you could see the fear they had of this man in the eyes of both the woman and her children. This hypothesis grew even stronger when officers spoke with Amanda. She said she had no proof, but she believed Kevin was the person behind the entire attack, and that the target hadn't been her sister, but her. But to understand this whole story, we need to go back in time and look at the relationship between Amanda and Kevin, which began in an unexpected way. She was a very ambitious and serious young woman in her senior year of college to become a doctor. She was 23 and went out one night with a friend to have some fun. Kevin saw her and started flirting with her, locking eyes, and when she left the place, he stopped to talk to her. Amanda found him handsome, charismatic, and very funny, so they decided to see each other again. But to many, Kevin was far from what Amanda was looking for in a potential partner, since after serving in the Air Force, playing on a semi-pro basketball team, boxing, and doing many other things in his life, he discovered he didn't enjoy military life. He spoke of experiencing racism and that basic training hadn't been very good, so he decided to switch to the Air National Guard, where he only had to serve 1 weekend a month. After that, he started working as a custodian at a veterans hospital. But at that point, Amanda didn't care much about this. She hadn't had much luck in love and, after all, had only had 2 serious relationships, both of which had ended due to infidelity by her partners. While Kevin wasn't as ambitious or serious as she was, he was very sweet-talking, attentive, kind, and seemed honest. Also, as a gesture to get her to trust him, he told her he was willing to share the passwords to his emails, his phone, practically everything, so she would trust him. And to Amanda, coming from those infidelities, that seemed like a very nice gesture.
Kevin came across as very trustworthy and honest. I remember him telling me, this is before we were even dating, he said that he would share his passwords to his emails. And I remember thinking that was very different. I didn't use any of them, but just the gesture alone said something.
The relationship progressed and they started living together. At first, everything seemed normal. Although, like many couples, they had occasional arguments, nothing was out of the ordinary. And after living together for a while, they decided to get married in 2009. And it was at that moment after the wedding that the red flags appeared.
And it really started to shift pretty immediately after we got married.
It all started with emotional control. Kevin wanted to know where Amanda was going, who she was talking to. He wanted her to give him her phone, and he checked it constantly. She gave in to many of his demands because she didn't want to make him angry. Over time, they started having children, but things didn't improve at all. Kevin became increasingly controlling and also increasingly violent, leading up to the year 2016. On one occasion when they were fighting, he locked her in a closet in the house. He told her he wasn't going to let her out, and on top of that, he hit her several times. It was at that moment that Amanda decided to file for divorce and also for a restraining order. But as we know, divorces are very slow processes. Often both parties have to do their part, to state the obvious, and that way things can move forward better. But in this case, Kevin didn't want to grant Amanda a divorce, and that's why by September 2017, they were still going through all these procedures. Also, as I mentioned, it's very important to note that he had a restraining order. In addition to that, also in June 2017, Amanda had suffered a brutal attack. She was in her car at midnight after a dance practice looking at her phone when she was struck on the head. She tried to defend herself, but the attacks continued, and as best she could, she locked herself in her vehicle and called 911. She had very serious injuries, especially to her face and head, and one over her eyebrow that required reconstructive surgery and also left her with permanent damage. At that moment, Amanda was convinced it had been Kevin, but she couldn't identify him with certainty, so not much could be done. Once the authorities heard Amanda's account and realized Kevin's background, they put him in the spotlight of the investigation, so they decided to go to his house to ask him some questions. They didn't really have any evidence against him, but they just wanted to start testing the waters. Kevin lived in an apartment with his mother, his sister, and a tenant. When the authorities knocked on the door, he was the one who answered. He said he had been sleeping and asked them what they wanted. At that moment, Kevin came out wearing a light-colored t-shirt. Keep this detail in mind because it's going to be very important later on. The police didn't fully explain why they were there. Kevin said he had nothing to do with whatever had happened and that he had spent the entire previous night sleeping at home, an attitude that seemed a bit strange to them. As I repeat, they hadn't given all the details of why they were at his door, and he was already taking a very defensive stance. In fact, when the officers started talking more, the only thing that seemed to surprise the man was that Amanda wasn't in town the night before. In addition to that, the police spoke with his mother and sister and they backed up his alibi, saying he had been home all night until the following morning. In that context, the police only had one card left to play: some surveillance cameras in the area that could disprove this alibi. However, everything seemed to fall apart when after the review, it was confirmed that Kevin had in fact been at his residence. Meanwhile, news of the tragedy began to spread, and no one could understand why anyone would want to take Alicia's life. The forensic analysis also revealed that she had been attacked with the front door partially open, and that the assailant had fired the weapon at least 7 times from the outside. According to this analysis, he had approached after this and continued firing. All of this was known from the holes in the door, the trajectory of the bullets, and many other clues at the scene. Added to this, it was revealed that the shell casing used was very uncommon, as it was manufactured in Russia. This finding made it possible to track a recent purchase at a nearby store, which at first was a very encouraging sign. But when they looked at the cameras, they realized that Kevin hadn't bought that ammunition, nor was a direct connection established with anyone in his circle. But the officers didn't give up and started over from scratch. At this point in the investigation, they realized they had only reviewed the security cameras at Kevin's house shortly before the events and until the following morning. And at that time, as I repeat, he wasn't seen entering or leaving. But they started looking at the footage from a few minutes before the attack. And about 40 minutes before the attack on Alicia, a man could be seen leaving Kevin's house shortly before the events and until the following morning. And at that time, as I repeat, he wasn't seen entering or leaving. But they started looking at the footage from a few minutes before the attack. And about 40 minutes before the attack on Alicia, a man could be seen leaving Kevin's house. The footage was very poor and the person couldn't be identified. But they did notice he was wearing a light-colored t-shirt, identical to the one Kevin had on the day they arrived to do the first mini-interrogation, let's call it that, at his house. In addition to that, a closer angle of the vehicle was also seen. It had a different front right tire than the rest. Later, the footage also showed the return of the same vehicle about 20 minutes later, with the same person getting out and entering the home again. With this, a new hypothesis emerged. While Kevin couldn't be physically placed at Amanda's house, it could be determined that another person sent by him had participated in the events. But really, beyond this clue, the police had no evidence, and it seemed too circumstantial, so they decided not to move forward with trying to blame Kevin at that time for Alicia's death. What they did charge him for in 2018 was that mysterious attack on Amanda, and he had to spend 3 years in prison. Or well, at least that was the sentence he was given at the time. Meanwhile, Alicia's case stalled until 2019, when a clue seemed to reshape the entire picture. It all started when a woman contacted the police, saying there was a young girl claiming she and her boyfriend had been hired for a crime, that they had carried out a murder, and when they described the house and the location, this woman realized it was the same house where Alicia had been killed. The woman said her boyfriend had been paid some money and that her boyfriend had decided to involve her in the events as well. At that time, it was believed this girl's name was Angelica, but it was later discovered that wasn't the case, that her real name was Alexis Heil. The officers took this lead very seriously because this woman also gave some details that were only in official documents and that only someone in the police or the people who had participated in the events could know. Once attention was focused on this lead, authorities began searching for Alexis on social media. They noticed she had several photos with a guy named Gerardon Phelps, and there were even several videos, one of which was recorded the night of the crime. The video showed Alexis inside a car, and based on visible landmarks in the recording, investigators located this vehicle about 10 minutes from Kevin's house. Another video also showed Gerardon showing off a substantial sum of money, and in analyzing all of this, the police found a key point. A comment made by a woman who turned out to be related to both Gerardon and Kevin. It turned out they were cousins, and in this way, they could already be linked. The police acted quickly and Alexis was the first to be arrested. At that point, she claimed to be a minor and requested a lawyer. Shortly after, Gerardon was also arrested. Hoping to get answers that would help clear up Alicia's death, investigators focused all their attention on Gerardon. The turning point came later, when they got a confession during the interrogation. He said that in fact Kevin had hired him.
Who was the person who shipped this? His name is David.
But as we can already guess, to kill his ex-wife Amanda, not to kill her sister. Gerardon explained that the order Kevin gave him was to go to that house and kill the woman who lived there. And he gave him a brief description of what she looked like. Gerardon didn't know Alicia or Amanda, so it was very easy for him to confuse them with the few details Kevin had given him. He mentioned that indeed, all of this had been agreed upon a few days before, but it wasn't until the day of the events that Kevin took him to see the house. This, as we already know, and as we were able to show in this video, was captured by security cameras, the moment Kevin leaves and returns before the events. Gerardon said that after identifying the house, he went to get his girlfriend, and after that, they both stayed in the vehicle for a few minutes. He asked his girlfriend to stay at the wheel so they could drive off quickly after he got back. Gerardon mentioned that he got out of the vehicle, carrying his gun, and tried to knock on the door. He started shooting. The door was slightly open and Alicia peeked her head out. He started shooting, she tried to close it, and he shot again, attacking her before fleeing the scene. With this confession, Kevin was arrested and charged with aggravated murder with a firearm and conspiracy to commit a crime. Gerardon Phelps, for his part, pleaded guilty to intentional murder and acknowledged that he had acted motivated by both money and to gain a reputation. He said Kevin had paid him $2,400. He said he spent the money on mundane things like boots, a designer belt, and getting tattoos. He was ultimately sentenced to 31 years in prison, and his girlfriend Alexis was sentenced to 15 years. Kevin, for his part, pleaded not guilty, and when facing trial, the prosecution hypothesized that it was a plan gone wrong. The defense, on the other hand, argued that Kevin had never explicitly ordered the crime, but that he had simply told his cousin he wanted to get his ex out of the way. This man's trial lasted for 6 weeks, and in November 2021, a verdict was reached in less than 3.5 hours. He was found guilty, and in January 2022, sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In addition to that, he was banned for life from any contact with Amanda and her children. He is currently serving his sentence in a Washington state prison and is expected to never hurt anyone again. In this way, a case that seemed like an unsolved mystery ended up revealing a disturbing truth. A planned crime marked by a case of mistaken identity. Now that you know all the details, tell me what you think. And well, guys, that's it for today's case. A very shocking case, also very sad like all the ones we bring. But I think this one is even more shocking and sad. Because in the end, Alicia wasn't the target of this whole crime. Obviously, her sister Amanda didn't deserve to be murdered either. But we can think that Alicia was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or maybe, if we get more philosophical, we can also think that it was destiny, that someone had to show up there and mistake her for her sister. But it really is a very tragic death. In addition to that, this man, Kevin, had already shown, well, a lot of violence against Amanda. There should have been more police surveillance at that house, they should have supported the family more, and maybe this tragedy could have been avoided. In the end, there's no changing the past, and Alicia ended up losing her life simply for going to watch her nephews, at the hands of a man who didn't care about anything. In the end, he received an exemplary sentence, and even though it took the police a while to solve the case, they got to the bottom of it, and Alicia's family was finally able to get justice. If you found this video informative, remember to leave a like, remember to subscribe if you haven't. I update 3 or 4 times a week, and if you're subscribed, you'll get a notification every time I upload a video. Now, see you in the next case. Bye.